The guests thought the bride had lost her mind. 10 seconds later, they realized she might have saved a life. The music had already begun. Soft piano notes drifted through the ballroom as hundreds of guests rose from their seats. Crystal chandeliers scattered golden light across polished marble floors. White roses lined the aisle. Cameras were ready. Smiles filled the room. Everything was exactly as Jasmine Carter had imagined for the past 7 years. Behind a pair of tall wooden doors, Jasmine stood alone for a moment, holding a bouquet of ivory roses. Her wedding dress shimmered beneath the warm lights. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, from anticipation. In just a few moments, she would walk toward the future she had spent years building. She closed her eyes and took a slow breath. Then she heard it. At first it sounded like a chair scraping across the floor. Nothing unusual. Then came a sharp gasp. Another. A glass shattered somewhere near the reception area. The music continued for a few seconds before confusion spread through the crowd. Jasmine opened her eyes. Voices rose. A woman screamed for help. Someone shouted for a manager. The atmosphere changed instantly. The joy inside the ballroom disappeared beneath a wave of uncertainty. Jasmine stepped forward and looked through the doorway. Guests were standing now. Some pointed toward the far side of the room. Others simply stared. Near a dining table close to the ballroom entrance, an older man appeared to be in distress. People surrounded him. No one seemed to know what to do. A wedding coordinator hurried toward Jasmine. "Do not worry," she said nervously. "The staff will handle it." But Jasmine was already moving. She handed her bouquet to a stunned bridesmaid and began crossing the ballroom. "Jasmine!" someone called behind her. "The ceremony is starting." She never looked back. Her wedding dress swept across the marble floor as she pushed through the crowd. Every step carried her farther from the aisle and closer to the stranger. The guests watched in disbelief. Some exchanged confused looks. Others lifted their phones. The groom stood at the altar, unable to understand what was happening. Jasmine reached the crowded table and saw the man clearly for the first time. Silver hair, expensive suit, a luxury watch resting against his wrist. Yet none of that mattered. In that moment he was not a billionaire, not a powerful businessman, not a stranger. He was simply a human being who needed help. Jasmine dropped to her knees beside him. Around her, dozens of people stood frozen. The room felt strangely quiet despite the chaos. She focused only on the man in front of her. Calm, steady, determined. The wedding could wait. The photographs could wait. The schedule could wait. A life could not. What Jasmine did not know was that her decision would end one chapter of her life before it even began. And by the following morning, a black limousine would be waiting outside her apartment building, carrying a future she never saw coming. Jasmine Carter had spent 7 years preparing for a day that seemed to disappear in less than 7 minutes. While hotel staff surrounded the stranger and emergency personnel were being contacted, she remained focused on helping until she was certain he was safe. Only then did she slowly step back. Around her, conversations erupted in nervous whispers. Guests stared. Some looked confused. Others looked frustrated. A few looked impressed. Jasmine barely noticed any of them. Her attention remained on the older man who was now recovering with assistants nearby. She had no idea who he was. She did not ask. She did not wait for thanks. She simply stood, smoothed her wedding dress, and quietly walked away from the crowd. If anyone had known Jasmine's story, they might have understood why helping someone else felt more natural to her than protecting her own moment. Jasmine grew up in a small Charleston apartment above a neighborhood bakery. The scent of fresh bread filled the hallways every morning. Money was always tight. Her mother, Lorraine Carter, worked long hours cleaning offices and caring for elderly clients. Jasmine learned early that kindness was not something people talked about. It was something they did. By 16, she was working after school. By 18, she was helping pay household bills. By 22, she was balancing restaurant shifts while caring for her mother after a serious health scare forced Lorraine to slow down. Life rarely gave Jasmine easy choices. Yet she faced each challenge with quiet determination. Her coworkers often noticed the same thing. She never treated people differently because of their income, appearance, or status. Whether serving a family celebrating a birthday or a businessman rushing through lunch, she offered the same smile, the same respect, the same patience. Years earlier, that attitude had caught the attention of a middle school teacher named Daniel Harper. He was thoughtful, dependable, and kind. Unlike many people, he never saw Jasmine as someone trapped by circumstances. He saw her strength. Their relationship grew steadily. No drama, no games, just years of supporting each other through difficult seasons. When Daniel proposed beside Charleston Harbor on a cool spring evening, Jasmine felt something she had not felt in years. Relief, hope, the belief that life might finally become a little easier. Today was supposed to be the beginning of that future. Yet as she stood alone in a quiet hallway near the ballroom, she felt an unfamiliar weight settling in her chest. The celebration had stopped. The schedule had collapsed. Somewhere inside the ballroom, guests were still talking about what had happened. Jasmine looked down at the bouquet she had reclaimed from her bridesmaid. Several white petals had loosened and fallen away. Such a small thing, yet somehow it felt symbolic. Behind the ballroom doors, people waited to see what would happen next. What Jasmine did not realize was that the choice she had made only minutes earlier was already beginning to change the lives of people she had never met. While guests continued whispering inside the ballroom, the man at the center of the chaos was being escorted to a private lounge on the other side of the hotel. His name was Richard Whitmore. Most people in America knew the name. They had seen it on business magazines, financial news programs, and lists ranking the wealthiest entrepreneurs in the country. Richard Whitmore was worth billions. His technology company employed tens of thousands of people across multiple states. Investors followed his decisions. Reporters chased his opinions. Yet very few people knew what he was really like when the cameras disappeared. At 58 years old, Richard had spent most of his adult life building an empire. Long before private jets and boardrooms, there had been a small office with outdated furniture and unpaid invoices stacked in cardboard boxes. He worked through weekends, missed vacations, sacrificed relationships. Success arrived slowly at first. Then it arrived all at once. Wealth changed his surroundings. It never completely changed him. Richard remained disciplined, reserved, careful about whom he trusted. Years of success had taught him an uncomfortable lesson. Many people treated him differently once they learned who he was. Some wanted money. Others wanted influence. Many simply wanted access. Genuine interactions became increasingly rare. That was one reason he often traveled without publicity whenever possible. Earlier that afternoon, he had arrived at the Charleston Hotel quietly. No media announcements. No interviews. No public appearance schedule. He was attending a private investment summit the following morning and planned to spend a peaceful evening reviewing documents before the event. Instead, he found himself seated near a wedding reception he had never intended to witness. Throughout dinner, he occasionally glanced toward the ballroom entrance. Families laughed together. Friends took photographs. Children chased one another between tables before parents called them back. For reasons he could not explain, he found the atmosphere comforting. There was something refreshing about ordinary happiness. Something money could never purchase. At one point, he noticed a young bride greeting guests before disappearing behind large wooden doors. Even from a distance, she seemed focused on everyone except herself. Richard remembered thinking she looked unusually calm. Then he returned to reviewing reports on his tablet and thought nothing more about it. Now, sitting quietly in the lounge after the incident, he found himself thinking about her again. Not the wedding, not the ballroom, her. The way she moved without hesitation. The way she ignored the attention around her. The way she seemed completely uninterested in recognition. Richard stared at the untouched glass of water on the table beside him. People often helped him because of who he was. This felt different. She had acted before knowing anything about him. Before knowing his name. Before knowing his bank account. For perhaps the first time in years, Someone had chosen to help Richard Whitmore simply because he was another human being. And as the evening continued outside, one question refused to leave his mind. Who was the woman who walked away from her own wedding to help a stranger? Back in the hallway outside the ballroom, time seemed to move differently. Minutes passed, yet nothing felt settled. The celebration that had been planned down to the smallest detail now hung in uncertainty. Guests remained seated, standing, or wandering in small groups, unsure whether to stay or leave. Jasmine sat alone in a quiet bridal suite near the end of the corridor. The bouquet rested beside her. A few loose petals lay scattered across the table. The room was silent except for the distant hum of conversation beyond the closed door. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. Earlier that day, she had seen a bride looking toward her future. Now she saw someone trying to understand her present. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. The door opened slowly. Her mother stepped inside. Lorraine Carter carried the same calm expression she always seemed to wear during difficult moments. She sat beside her daughter without speaking. Sometimes mothers understood that silence was more useful than advice. After a long pause, Lorraine reached over and squeezed Jasmine's hand. "You did the right thing," she said softly. Jasmine nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the mirror. "Then why does everything feel so complicated?" Lorraine smiled sadly. "Because doing the right thing does not always make life easier." Another knock came from the doorway. This time it was Daniel. He stood there quietly, still dressed in his wedding suit. His expression revealed nothing. No anger, no frustration, no joy, just exhaustion. Lorraine rose and left the room, gently closing the door behind her. For several seconds, neither Jasmine nor Daniel spoke. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Finally, Daniel walked farther into the room. "Everyone keeps asking me what happened," he said. Jasmine lowered her eyes. "I am sorry. I know." His voice remained calm. "And I know why you did it." He sat down across from her. "That is what makes this difficult." Jasmine looked up. Daniel stared at the bouquet resting on the table. "You would do the same thing again, would you not?" The answer arrived immediately. "Yes." Daniel gave a small nod as if he had expected it. "That is what I thought." The room fell quiet once more. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the hotel windows. The storm had arrived without warning. Jasmine suddenly realized the question was not about the stranger. It was about who she was. Daniel understood that, perhaps better than anyone. "You always put other people first," he said. "It is one of the reasons I love you." He paused. "And sometimes it is the reason I worry." Jasmine felt tears gathering in her eyes. Not because he was criticizing her, because he was telling the truth. Somewhere across the hotel, Richard Whitmore was preparing to leave for the evening. Somewhere inside the ballroom, guests continued discussing the bride who walked away from her own ceremony. And somewhere neither Jasmine nor Daniel could yet see, the consequences of a single decision were already beginning to unfold. The rain continued long after most of the wedding guests had gone home. By midnight, the ballroom had been cleared, the flowers were being packed away, and the celebration that was supposed to mark the beginning of a marriage had quietly faded into memory. Jasmine sat beside the window of her small apartment, still wearing part of her wedding attire beneath a borrowed coat. The bouquet rested on the table beside an untouched cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Across the room, Lorraine had finally fallen asleep in her chair, exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. Jasmine wanted to sleep too, but her mind refused to settle. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the ballroom, the crowd, the stranger, Daniel's face. Her phone buzzed several times throughout the night. Friends checked on her. Family members offered support. A few guests shared opinions she had never asked for. Jasmine ignored them all. Meanwhile, across Charleston Harbor, Richard Whitmore sat alone inside the study of his waterfront estate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked dark water shimmering beneath distant city lights. A stack of reports waited on his desk. Important emails filled his inbox. None of them held his attention. His thoughts kept returning to the young woman in the wedding dress. Finally, shortly after 1 o'clock in the morning, he picked up his phone and called his chief of staff. "I need information about someone," he said. The woman on the other end sounded surprised. "At this hour?" Richard glanced toward the harbor. "It cannot wait." Within hours, a small team began gathering publicly available information. Nothing invasive, nothing improper, just enough to identify the woman who had helped him. By sunrise, a file sat on Richard's desk. He opened it slowly. Jasmine Carter, 29 years old, waitress, lifelong Charleston resident, caregiver to her mother, multiple jobs over the years, community volunteer, no history of seeking publicity, no record of asking anyone for favors. Richard continued reading. The deeper he looked, the quieter he became. Every page revealed another sacrifice, another responsibility, another reason she could have chosen herself instead of a stranger. Yet she had not. She had walked away from the moment she had waited years to experience because someone needed help. Richard leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. Wealth had introduced him to thousands of people. Very few had impressed him. Jasmine Carter had done so without even trying. A faint smile appeared on his face. Then he reached for the phone again. "Arrange transportation," he said. "For this morning." His chief of staff hesitated. "What exactly would you like us to do?" Richard looked at the file one final time. "I would like to thank her properly." Outside, dawn spread across Charleston in shades of gold and pale blue. Jasmine was finally asleep on the couch when the first rays of sunlight entered her apartment. She had no idea that a black limousine was already making its way through the city streets toward her neighborhood, carrying an invitation that would change the direction of her life. Jasmine woke to the sound of someone knocking on the front door of the apartment building. At first she thought she was dreaming. The previous day still felt unreal. The wedding, the stranger, the rain, Daniel. Everything blended together like fragments of a story she could not fully remember. Another knock echoed through the hallway, this one louder. Lorraine was already standing near the window. "Jasmine," she called softly, "you should probably come see this." Jasmine pulled a sweater over her clothes and walked toward the entrance. She expected a neighbor, maybe a delivery driver. Instead, she stopped in her tracks. Parked directly in front of the building was a long black limousine. Its polished exterior reflected the morning sunlight. Several neighbors stood nearby pretending not to stare. They were failing badly. Curtains moved in surrounding windows. A teenager across the street openly pointed at the vehicle. Jasmine opened the front door and stepped outside. A tall man wearing a tailored navy suit stood beside the limousine. He smiled politely. "Miss Jasmine Carter?" She nodded cautiously. "Yes." The man extended a business card. "My name is Thomas Reynolds. I represent Mr. Richard Whitmore." The name immediately sounded familiar. Then she remembered. The stranger from the hotel. Jasmine looked from the card to the limousine and back again. "I think there has been some mistake." Thomas shook his head. "No mistake, Miss Carter. Mr. Whitmore would like to meet with you personally." Jasmine almost laughed. Not because the situation was funny, because it felt impossible. 24 hours ago, she had been preparing to walk down an aisle. Now a Billionaire's representative was standing outside her apartment building. "Why?" she asked. Thomas opened a leather folder and removed a sealed envelope. "Mr. Whitmore thought you might ask that." Jasmine carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. The paper was simple. The message was even simpler. "Miss Carter, yesterday you gave up something important for someone you did not know. Most people talk about character. You demonstrated it. Please allow me the opportunity to thank you in person. Respectfully, Richard Whitmore." Jasmine read the note twice, then a third time. The words felt genuine. Not corporate. Not rehearsed. Genuine. Lorraine stepped outside beside her and glanced at the limousine. "Well," she said quietly, "that is certainly different." Jasmine smiled despite herself. "You think I should go?" Lorraine looked at the note before returning it. I think life rarely knocks twice. The neighborhood remained unusually quiet as Jasmine considered her decision. Yesterday she had chosen to help a stranger. Today that stranger was reaching back across a divide neither of them had expected to cross. Thomas opened the limousine door. Whenever you are ready. Jasmine looked at her apartment building one last time. The cracked sidewalk. The old mailbox. The place where her entire world had existed for years. Then she took a deep breath and stepped forward, unaware that the conversation waiting ahead would change far more than either of them imagined. Jasmine had never ridden in a limousine before. As the vehicle moved through Charleston, she sat quietly beside the window, watching familiar streets slowly give way to neighborhoods she had only seen from a distance. The farther they traveled, the more unreal the morning felt. Small storefronts became waterfront estates. Traffic faded. Tall gates appeared. Finally, the limousine turned onto a private road lined with ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. At the end stood a sprawling estate overlooking Charleston Harbor. Jasmine stared through the glass. The property seemed less like a home and more like something from a magazine. Yet what caught her attention was not the mansion. It was the view. Sunlight danced across the harbor, turning the water into a field of liquid gold. The limousine stopped. Thomas opened the door. We have arrived. Jasmine stepped out slowly. The air smelled of salt and fresh grass. Everything around her felt calm, intentional. A woman greeted her at the entrance and guided her through wide hallways filled with natural light. Expensive artwork decorated the walls, but what surprised Jasmine most were the personal details. Family photographs, shelves filled with worn books, a half-finished crossword puzzle resting beside an armchair. The house felt lived in, human. Eventually they reached a quiet study overlooking the harbor. The door opened. Richard Whitmore stood beside the window. He was not wearing a tailored suit, just a light blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up and dark slacks. For a moment, he looked less like one of the richest men in America and more like an ordinary man waiting for a guest. He smiled when he saw her. Miss Carter. Jasmine nodded politely. Mr. Whitmore. Richard gestured toward a small table set with coffee and pastries. Please, seat. Jasmine noticed one of the coffee cups had already gone cold. He had clearly been waiting for some time. They sat facing each other. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Richard broke the silence. I owe you an apology. Jasmine looked surprised. An apology? Richard nodded. Yesterday, everyone kept calling you a hero. I never actually thanked you myself. Jasmine lowered her eyes briefly. You do not owe me anything. Richard smiled faintly. That seems to be where we disagree. He looked out toward the harbor before continuing. Most people spend their lives protecting what matters most to them. Yesterday you walked away from it. Jasmine remained silent. Richard studied her expression carefully. Do you regret your decision? The question lingered between them. Jasmine thought about the wedding, Daniel, her mother, the uncertainty waiting back home. Then she answered honestly. I regret that people were hurt. Her voice softened. But I do not regret helping. Richard sat quietly for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, as though her answer confirmed something important. What Jasmine did not realize was that this conversation was only the beginning. Because Richard Whitmore had not invited her there simply to say thank you. He had invited her because he believed her future was much larger than she imagined. Jasmine expected a thank you, perhaps a charitable donation in her name, maybe even an offer to help with the expenses from the wedding that never happened. She did not expect Richard Whitmore to slide a folder across the table and tell her that he had spent the entire morning thinking about her future. Jasmine looked down at the folder but did not open it immediately. Richard noticed. Most people would have opened that before sitting down, he said with a faint smile. Most people are probably smarter than I am, Jasmine replied. The comment made Richard laugh for the first time that day. I highly doubt that. Finally, she opened the folder. Inside were photographs, program reports, and documents describing community projects across the country. Food assistance initiatives, educational scholarships, youth mentorship programs, medical support networks. The pages represented millions of dollars in charitable work. Jasmine looked confused. Why are you showing me this? Richard leaned back in his chair. Because for years I have been searching for the right person. Jasmine glanced up. For what? Richard folded his hands together. Someone who understands people. The answer surprised her. There are thousands of qualified professionals. There are thousands of qualified professionals, Richard agreed. There are not thousands of people willing to sacrifice something important for a complete stranger. Silence settled between them. Outside the study window, sailboats drifted slowly across the harbor. The water sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. Richard continued. I created a foundation years ago. It does good work. But somewhere along the way, it became very good at measuring outcomes and not always as good at understanding people. He tapped the folder gently. Then yesterday I watched a waitress walk away from her own wedding because another human being needed help. Jasmine lowered her eyes. The praise still made her uncomfortable. I only did what anyone should do. Richard shook his head. That is the problem. His voice softened. Not everyone would. He opened another section of the folder. Inside was a proposal, a leadership fellowship attached to his foundation, training, mentorship, travel opportunities, a pathway into nonprofit leadership. Jasmine stared at the pages. The opportunity felt unreal. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious. Richard smiled. But before you say anything, understand this is not a reward. Jasmine looked at him carefully. Then what is it? Richard glanced toward the harbor. An investment. The answer lingered in the room. Jasmine continued reading. Every page seemed to open a door she had never imagined existed. Yet instead of excitement, she felt hesitation. Richard noticed immediately. What are you thinking? Jasmine closed the folder. I am thinking that my entire life changed in less than 24 hours. Richard nodded slowly. That tends to happen when destiny gets impatient. Jasmine laughed despite herself. Then her expression became serious again. Because there was one person she still could not stop thinking about. One conversation that remained unfinished. And before she could decide anything about her future, she knew she would have to face the past waiting for her back in Charleston. Jasmine left the estate carrying the folder in her hands. But the real weight she felt had nothing to do with paper. The limousine ride back to Charleston seemed shorter than before. Outside the window, the city moved through its ordinary routines. People walked to work. Restaurants opened their doors. Traffic flowed through familiar streets. Life continued as though nothing had changed. Yet everything had changed. When she arrived home, Lorraine immediately saw it in her daughter's eyes. Not certainty, not excitement, possibility. That evening, Jasmine sat alone on the apartment balcony, watching the sun disappear beyond the rooftops. Her phone rested beside her. For hours she stared at a message she had received earlier that day from Daniel. Finally, she called him. They met at a quiet waterfront park near the harbor where they had spent countless evenings together over the years. Daniel arrived first. Jasmine could tell he was nervous. So was she. For a few moments neither spoke. Then Daniel smiled softly. How are you? Jasmine laughed. I honestly do not know. The answer made both of them smile. They talked for nearly an hour. About the wedding. About the stranger. About the choices neither of them had expected to face. There were no arguments. No blame. Just honesty. By the end of the conversation, both understood something important. Sometimes people care deeply about each other and still find themselves standing at different crossroads. When they finally stood to leave, Daniel gently squeezed her hand. Whatever happens next, he said, I hope it is everything you deserve. Jasmine felt tears in her eyes. Thank you. They walked away with respect, gratitude, and peace. The next morning, Jasmine called Richard Whitmore. She accepted the fellowship. Not because it promised a different life, because it gave her an opportunity to become more of who she already was. Months later, she found herself working with communities across the country, helping families, students, and local organizations build brighter futures. The work challenged her, inspired her, changed her. One afternoon, while attending a foundation event overlooking Charleston Harbor, Richard handed her a small box. Inside rested a carefully preserved ivory rose from her wedding bouquet. Jasmine looked up in surprise. Richard smiled. Some moments are worth remembering. She held the rose gently and gazed out across the water. The harbor shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Boats drifted peacefully toward the horizon. And for the first time, Jasmine understood that losing one future had allowed her to discover another. The most important decision of her life had lasted only a few seconds. A choice made without expectation, without reward, without certainty. Yet that single act revealed something no amount of money could ever purchase. Character. Because in the end, the greatest gift was not the opportunity Richard offered. It was the truth Jasmine discovered about herself. The people who change lives are often the ones who never set out to change anything at all.